All right, Abraham chapter 3. I hope you are enjoying these videos. We're way into Abraham now and getting into some really good stuff. So if you remember from last time in chapter 2, we learned that Abraham is on his way to Egypt. This is his part of what God has asked him to do, is to go to Egypt. So there's a couple of great things we learn here. From the subheading, of course, Abraham learns about the sun, moon, and stars by means of the Urim and Thummim. The Lord reveals to him the eternal nature of spirits. He learns of pre-earth life, foreordination, the creation, the choosing of a redeemer, and the second estate of man. So this is similar to what Moses had in Moses chapter 1. So if you go back, you can kind of compare these two together, or use the Come Follow Me, because it talks about both of these chapters together. These are the grand visions, okay, of the prophets. These are, like, in a way, this is the endowment ceremony of the prophets. So this is a lot of similar things we cover in the endowment in the temple, but they are the grand visions that they get. All great prophets have this grand vision where they get to see the plan of salvation. They get to see the workings of God, which is the solar system and those kinds of things. So in the ancient world, they were called cosmocrators. The great cosmocrator, the cosmos, people that understood these grand things that were out there. So a couple of notes that I have right here at the very beginning, of course, from Hugh Nibley. Go figure. This one is from Eloquent Witness by Hugh Nibley. It's volume 17 of his collected works. He says here, the moment he, meaning Abraham, is rescued, the angel takes him up to heaven, and then the angel shows him a picture. He draws the whole thing for him on this round picture, and points it out to him and says, when you get back to earth, you make a duplicate of that. So Hugh Nibley is kind of summarizing this experience of Abraham for us. Well, he shows him this diagram of the cosmos, and it looks like our facsimiles. And of course, we see it as the hypocephalus, what it is. Okay, and we're going to talk about the hypocephalus, which is the round facsimile number 2 in the book of Abraham. That's coming up. Let's see. Okay, there are. When Pharaoh ordered all his court, 365 nobles, to bring their children to the court, and had Abraham sit on the throne and teach them about the sun and the stars. That's what it says here in facsimile 3 in the book of Abraham. Abraham, sitting upon Pharaoh's throne, is reasoning upon the principles of astronomy, or the heavens. Now, here's an interesting thing. That figure on the throne is Osiris. Well, of course he's Osiris. He has to be Abraham. He has to be. Abraham would have to be Osiris in that capacity, and he is the king. But how it begins with facsimile number 1. Okay, so this is going into understanding a little bit of Egyptian mythology and how they look at things. And so oftentimes they would represent figures by making them look like a god, to represent them like, the god of wisdom or the god of other things, to bring them in symbolically to understand which god they were interacting with or which divine nature they were trying to work with. So he says in here, in facsimile 1, you remember Abraham's lying down on the sacrifice table. Osiris is lying on the couch, and he cries out, "Come to my aid and rescue me." When he reaches the depth at the last extremities, he cries out, and the angel of the Lord comes to deliver him. Now, this is Horus, you'll notice. He is the Horus hawk, and always the son of Osiris is Horus. Horus comes in the form of a hawk and rescues him and takes him up. He delivers him, and then he takes him on a guided tour through the heavens. Before you receive your final throne, you have this tour of the universe. You see all this stuff, and then in the final scene, you mount the throne. This is what you do. You come out in glory. And so this is the theme and is exactly the course, the sequence that we follow in the Pearl of Great Price, facsimiles 1, 2, and 3 in that order. And so at the great temple of Dendera, you find upon the roof the resurrection complex. And there, what do you find but the themes of this Osiris myth? A sacrifice, a revelation of the cosmos, followed by coronation. So this is a very common trend in the ancient world of going through these year rites to be king that were very representative of resurrection, of death, of atonement, those kinds of things as well, that is really great. And so they put these in there as well, understanding this grand vision, because all the great prophets had a grand vision. Enoch had one, Noah, Abraham, of course, Moses and others after this will have grand visions. Adam had a grand vision. Seth, they all had them. So the kings would have to have them as well. And of course, pharaohs were either seen as gods or sons of God. So they would need to have this. So they were using rituals to make it appear as if they were prophets and revelators, basically. But of course, the challenge that Pharaoh had when Abraham went to Egypt was he really was a prophet and revelator. And as we'll see as we go through the rest of the story of Abraham. So here's another article here. This is another section of The Eloquent Witness from Hugh Nibley. He says here, so here we have the hypocephalus motifs between what? Between facsimile 1, facsimile 2, and next facsimile 3 is coronation. Now we emerge directly from the passage room, the passage through the kingdoms, the passage through the cosmos, to a coronation. We would say facsimile number 3. This is the king on his throne, and all of these are typical coronation features celebrating him, endowing him with the things he needs, and so forth. After passing through the cosmos, our hero, be it Abraham or someone else, now sits on the throne of Pharaoh and is endowed with his power. Notice he is holding, of course, he has to hold the insignia of justice and judgment, the flail and the crook, and he is being held as the living king. Therefore, these are the mysteries of Osiris. See, they are taught to him, and they include the greatest mystery of all, what comes after life. You see, that is what they want to know, but the main idea is this, making connections and hacking in or getting into the circuit, and so forth. These temple ordinances and things, they put you into a different order of things, which the world will not understand. And if you try to make them vulgarized down here and treat them as if they belong to this universe of discourse, then you spoil them. But you have this general sense now of working ourselves into a much larger universe of discourse. We have been very localized here, and Joseph Smith had a mind as broad as all eternity. He introduced us into all of this, and then we immediately, our first reaction is to flinch and draw back. You say, well, let's go back to tithing and the word of wisdom, and that's the story. It's a mystery because it's not known to the world we see around us. It is a mystery in that sense, but it should not be a mystery to you. You're free to go as far as you want. It is entirely up to you. We're all still qualifying as Osiris's as far as that goes. So just some interesting ideas how ancient Egypt used this, and this is a philosophy that the year-right kings used in Asia and all over Mesopotamia and even into Rome in a way. So it's the same story that Abraham's going through, the grand vision that they get, where they learn some things, their mind gets expanded, then they are allowed to learn great things and continue to move on to understand the cosmos and so forth. And then they receive their blessings, their rites. So this is really the same thing that we get in our days when we think of the temple. We prepare to go to the temple, we reach a level of worthiness with baptism and things, then we go to the temple where we have the opportunity to learn the great grand things that are out there, to understand it, and then with the scriptures and things like the Pearl of Great Price and modern revelation, we have such an opportunity to really jump into that, if you call it a rabbit hole, you could, of truth, to dig deeper. And there's so much there, it's awesome. So chapter 3, we are learning and going through this experience that Abraham is about to have, where he is literally going through this. So this isn't just a ritualistic ceremony, this is him actually going through it. So let's get started on this. Verse 1. And I, Abraham, had the Urim and Thummim, which the Lord my God had given unto me in the Ur of Chaldees. So now I've got there's a couple quotes on this. Let me give you a couple quotes here. So thus, this is again, Hugh Nibley, this is from his volume 2 book, Enoch the Prophet. He says, thus quoting Eumalpus from 140 BC, Eusebius reports that Abraham taught astronomy to the Egyptians at Heliopolis, which is the great prehistoric Egyptian observatory, giving himself and the Babylonians credit for establishing the science while actually recognizing Enoch as its true discoverer. So he's learning from the writings of Enoch, which is Noah's great-great-grandfather. Syncellus and Cedrenus hand down the tradition on the authority of Enoch himself, that it was the angel Uriel who taught astronomy to Enoch. So we have this tendency to think of ancient Babylonia and ancient Egypt as the ones where astronomy originated from. But when we look back at some of the ancient records, they realize that some of the ancient historians and writers back then actually admit that it was understanding the teachings of Enoch is where they get this from, because Enoch was one of the ones to have a grand vision. Other than Adam and Seth, Enoch was the main one to have the grand vision. He's the originator of the flood prophecy that his great-great-grandson Noah was alive for at the time. So that's important. Now, we know, if you get into understanding the latter-day things about Urim and Thummim, okay, we know that the Urim and Thummim is somewhat of a breastplate that had the 12 stones, one representing the tribes of Egypt, or tribes of Israel, on there. And it had these little rims that would stick out on it, and these stones you could put in it, like a seer stone or other things like that. Joseph Smith talks about using the Urim and Thummim. We know that the Urim and Thummim that Joseph had was given to him because it was put into the stone box with the gold plates and the sword of Laban and to the Liahona. And that is the one that most likely King Mosiah used as the Urim and Thummim to translate the Jaredite scriptures from and use. And where he got it from is a little fuzzy. Actually, no, sorry, it's not him that got it. It was a little fuzzy because he most likely had it because they were with the Jaredite plates, because the Urim and Thummim, the 2 extra stones, were given to the brother of Jared, basically, that were then used for that, and they probably later built that, and Ether probably had it, and so forth, and it came up with them. Is that the same Urim and Thummim that Abraham had? I'm not 100% sure on that. I could have another note or two in here on the Urim and Thummim. If you have some more information on that, please put it in the comments. That would be really great. This could be the same Urim and Thummim. It says here the Lord gave this to him, and that could be literal, that when he saw the grand vision of the Savior in the previous chapter, that he was given the Urim and Thummim, or given these seer stones to interpret and understand things with. So there could be 2 Urim and Thummims out there. One that Abraham had that we don't know where it went or what happened after that, or maybe it was either taken back to heaven and then given to the brother of Jared or something. Actually, this is well after the brother of Jared, so he already has his 2 stones on the American continent while Abraham has this here. So there really are 2 at the same time on the earth at this time. So there's some really interesting traditions in ancient writings about the Abraham stone. So let's get into understanding this a little bit more. Abraham's green stone was, according to tradition, actually a book that was originally given to Adam. This book was written on a sapphire stone. The angel who delivered it to Adam showed him the order of the planets and took him on a tour of the entire cosmos, showing him every particle. See Moses 1:27. And explaining the creation. He also saw the whole human race before its judges. Adam taught Seth about the engravings, and Seth hid them from a corrupt world. Enoch was shown in a dream where to find them, and the stone taught him all about the seasons, the planets, and the lights, and everything about the earth. He also hid it until it was transferred to Noah by the angel Raphael. And by it Noah was able to discern all the workings of celestial mechanics, and behold also the 2 sides of everything, life and death, good and evil, and the cycles of birth and death. At the hour of his death, he gave it to his son Shem, and Shem gave it to Abraham. By means of it, Abraham was able to see the glory of God. So this is in Hugh Nibley's Collected Works, Volume 19, One Eternal Round, which is a very fun book to read. So a lot of good stuff there. Now let's go on to verse 2. And I saw the stars, that they were very great, and that one of them was nearest unto the throne of God. And there were many great ones which were near unto it. Now, one thing I want to talk about with this is there's a way to think about this that's different. I know most of the time when we think about this, we're thinking about a 3-dimensional universe, talking about galaxies and solar systems and clusters, galactic clusters, and things like that. I don't think that's a bad way to think about this, okay? But I would recommend considering looking at this from a 4-dimensional or a multi-dimensional world. And what I mean by that is when you get into understanding quantum mechanics, that we realize that when you like string theory, in order for these strings to exist, there's a convergence of multiple dimensions that come together. And there's energy that comes across those dimensions into each other to help build the realities of the universe that we are in. In fact, it's hypothesized because the graviton, or the gravity-carrying particle, like for light, there's a light-carrying particle called a photon and so forth. The graviton that carries gravity, the effect of gravity that we feel when it interacts with us, is such a high-energy particle that they're really struggling to actually find it using the Large Hadron Collider in Europe. So they have to make a much bigger one to get to the high energy levels they would need to find the graviton. But some theorize that graviton might not come from this world. It might come from a different world. And it is an energy effect coming from another dimension that's influencing ours. And when you read about this understanding of curtains and heavenly vaults where the natural forces emanate from, it really gives us this understanding idea of how our laws of physics, in a way, honestly, could be completely based on laws of physics in the spiritual realm that influence and power our laws of physics. So our world is powered by a spiritual dimension, basically, that we can't see in this physical world, but exists right here next to us and with us. And we already know that heaven is a different place than earth, and even the spirit world, which is on the earth, is in just a different energy level, basically, or almost a different dimension on this earth. So this idea of multiple dimensions is very plausible, and even reading Abraham 3 makes this somewhat plausible. So think about it not just in the terms of a three-dimensional universe or galaxies in space, but think of it in a fourth dimension where time and other dimensions come into play, basically, and interact with each other. So the note that I have on verse 2 says here, this is a quote from Hugh Nibley: "It has been suggested that the remarkable interest in stargazing that meets us in the Abraham traditions is so vividly brought home in the Book of Abraham may be the normal result of a period of unusual celestial displays." So there could have been, at the time of Abraham, lots of unique celestial things happening. Possibly, that is, eclipses, possibly asteroids or comets coming by, or other things like that could have gotten people to really think about the stars and things that were going on in the galaxy and the solar system and things like that. So let's get in and talk about this more. And again, think more four-dimensional or multi-dimensional rather than just the three dimensions of space that we have. "And the Lord said unto me, These are the governing ones, and the name of the great one is Kolob, because it is near unto me. For I am the Lord thy God. I have set this one to govern all those which belong to the same order as that upon which thou standest." So order, you could say, is dimension, the same dimension as the same dimension as where the earth is. Okay, so Kolob doesn't govern all creation, just that part which we are a part of. So Kolob is a great one that is there to govern our dimension, basically. Now here's another one here. He is only allowing Moses. Remember, this is, if you think about it, this was also talked about in the book of Moses. Remember, we reference Abraham chapter 3. He's only allowing Moses to understand everything from his perspective on earth. And this is the same with Abraham from here as we see. He's not getting God's perspective or an outside perspective. The anthropology principle, the anthropic principle, is a philosophical consideration that observations of the universe must be compatible with the conscious and sapient life that observes it. Now, this is a really fascinating point because as we learn when we look at quantum mechanics, that when you get into the point wave theory, that it's the observer that makes a difference. How you observe the elements, they shift and they change based upon your observation. So shouldn't be a hard concept for us to understand, because when we look at something like social media and their algorithms, social media is curating all the information that's out there to curate it in a specific way for us to see it from our perspective, or what we want to see or have seen in the past. So we don't get to see everything, but we only get to see a part of what we want to see. or what we've told that algorithm through our past history, what we're interested in looking at. So this is the same thing. So realize everybody has these different perspectives that they're coming at. This is why coming together in unity is important, because then we learn from each other's perspectives. And when we can see everybody else's perspectives, our perspective goes from a limited amount to a much broader perspective to see better. So, all right, let's move on here. Verse 4, and the Lord said unto me by the Urim and Thummim, that Kolob was after the manner of the Lord, according to its times and seasons and the revolutions thereof. That one revolution was a day unto the Lord, after his manner of reckoning, it being 1,000 years, according to the time appointed unto that whereon thou standest. So one day to Kolob is 1,000 years to us. And Kolob is related to God, basically. So this is referencing that idea that 1,000 years to man is a day to God, which is one way to think about it. Okay, this is the reckoning of the Lord's time according to the reckoning of Kolob. It doesn't mean everything is literally ran this way. Whenever you hear about a day in a revelation, like I know in the book of Revelation, they talk about a half an hour of silence, and they're trying to use this same equation of a half an hour of silence in heaven to be how many years would that be? If one day, one 24-hour period to God is 1,000 years to us, how much would 30 minutes be? And then trying to think, that's like what, 21, 23 years, I think is what people are saying. So that there's 21 or 23 years of silence in heaven before the seventh seal or those kinds of things. It doesn't necessarily completely translate that way. And we can't look at that even if remember, you go back to the book of Genesis and even in Moses, when he talks about the creation period, he's talking about them in days, reference of days. Not because he's trying to say that a day to God is 1,000 years to us, so every creation period was 1,000 years long. He's using the term day and night to talk about the beginning and the ending of a period. How long each period was, we don't know. So we have to be careful. We can't use one calculation and make it the same over everything. It doesn't always work that way. So just like there's different equations in math for different things, we have to make sure we're applying the right equation. Okay, so just understand that. So he's explaining this here, but it doesn't mean that everything a day, mentioned in the scriptures means 1,000 years. Verse 5, and the Lord said unto me, the planet which is the lesser light, lesser than that which is to rule the day, even the night, is above or greater than that upon which thou standest in point of reckoning. For it moveth in order more slow. This is in order because it standeth above the earth upon which thou standest. Therefore the reckoning of time is not so many as to its number of days and months of years. So he's talking about the lesser light, or the moon, basically. And this stands above the earth, so it rotates around the earth, but its days and years are reckoned a little different than what we have on the earth. And if you understand gravity, this is what they're talking about, okay? Time is a function of gravity, and we don't have time to get into that discussion right in this video, but realize that our perception of how time moves is based on the amount of gravity we feel. If you want to get an idea of this, I believe it's the movie Interstellar, where they use the wormhole and travel through space. They go to this one planet that has extreme gravity, and the team, they leave one guy in the space station, the space ship, and the rest of the team takes the little small shuttle probe down. They're on the Earth. They're on this place for like a half an hour, 45 minutes, and they go back. And so they haven't, to them, time has only been like an hour there and back. To the guy up on the space station, they've been gone 30 years. So he's aged tremendously, and they only thought it was an hour. So it's something I have to get in a little bit more science to understand a little bit more, but there's a lot of great stuff there. Verse 6, and the Lord said unto me, now, Abraham, these two facts exist. Behold, thine eyes see it. It is given unto thee to know the times of reckoning, and the set time, yea, the set time of the earth upon which thou standest, and the set time of the greater light, which is set to rule the day, the sun, and the set time of the lesser light, which is set to rule the night, the moon. And now the set time of the lesser light is a longer time as to its reckoning than the reckoning of the time of the earth upon which thou standest. What does that mean? There's less gravity on the moon than there is on the earth, because time moves faster in less gravity, basically. Just had to make sure I think through that right. So the more gravity you experience, the slower time goes. So realize when they're talking about setting a time, they're talking about the effects of gravity. Those are the same things. And where these two facts exist, there shall be another fact above them. That is, there shall be another planet whose reckoning of time shall be longer still. Meaning there's another one that's at a higher energy or has more gravity, basically. Now, this isn't necessarily saying, the thing to realize about this is he's using this idea of planets and gravitational effects and time, basically, to help us understand that there is a prioritization. Some laws are higher priority than other laws. Some laws influence other laws, and some laws get influenced by other laws, okay? There's a hierarchy to things, talking about, God and man and those kinds of things as well, okay? And this should be important because this is also talking about where else do we hear the greater light, the lesser light, but the plan of salvation, the celestial kingdom, the terrestrial kingdom, the telestial kingdom, okay? That's what they're talking about in here. Not so much the actual literal gravity, but using this as a metaphor to understand these things better. And so there's always a hierarchy in place, basically. Verse 9, and thus there shall be the reckoning of the time of one planet above another, until thou come nigh unto Kolob, which Kolob is after the reckoning of the Lord's time, which Kolob is set nigh unto the throne of God to govern all those planets which belong to the same order as that upon which thou standest. So again, Kolob is governing us, and Kolob is near the throne of God. Okay, again, we could think about this from a three-dimensional space perspective, looking at the idea that somewhere, our galaxy is part of a larger cluster of galaxies, is connected to other galaxies, that eventually, if we were to probe far enough into space, we could find Kolob, this great star that seems to be governing everything, and then from there, that would be near to the throne of God. Or we can look at this from a multi-dimensional standpoint and realize that there is something in another dimension that is governing and controlling all the laws and timing and things of everything in our dimension. That means we can't necessarily see it when we look out into our dimension because we're only seeing our dimension. We have to go to a different level of energy to get into the other dimensions. So here is another quote, again, Hugh Nibley, eloquent witness. If you didn't realize, Hugh Nibley wrote 4 books on Abraham. There's so much about Abraham and what Abraham's done. It's amazing. Before being introduced to his home planet, Abraham is given a view of the cosmos in which he is reminded again and again that distance, directions, and motions are all represented to him in a way relative to his point of view only. The Lord said, remember this in relationship to you. It is not everything. Everything is to be comprehended not in absolute condition, but only as it appears from one point. So very important concept to understand. Let's move on here. Verse 10, it is given unto thee to know the set times of all the stars that are set to give light until thou come near unto the house of God. So again, understanding our universe and the laws of physics and things. Thus I, Abraham, talked with the Lord face to face as one man talketh with another, and he told me of the works which his hands had made. And he said unto me, my son, and his hand was stretched out. Behold, I will show you all these. And he put his hand upon mine eyes, and I saw those things which his hands had made, which were many, and they multiplied before mine eyes, and I could not see the end thereof. Now, in a way, we could be looking at this as, understanding our dimension. So he's looking at the universe. He's looking at creations of all kinds of animals and all kinds of things, and planets and stars, galaxies, all kinds of things. And then if you've ever looked at there's a great picture. I don't remember if it was a Hubble telescope that took the picture. It's been about 20 years ago. It took a picture of space, and you realize it kind of zoomed in. They have a couple of inset pictures that zoom in to show how, it looks like a bazillion stars, but then you got to realize that each point of light on this image is a galaxy. So these bazillions of points of lights in this image are representative of each point of light. Even though there's a bazillion of them, each point represents a bazillion planets. So it's just nearly infinite. It's just so large of an idea, it's hard to comprehend with the human mind how much there is. So verse 13, and he said unto me, this is Shinia, which is the sun. And he said unto me, Kokab, which is star. And he said unto me, Oleia, which is the moon. So these are words he's given to him. And he said unto me, Kokabim, which signifies stars, were all the great lights which were in the firmament of heaven. So some important things here. Shinia is the Hebrew word for star. Okay, Kokabim is the plural of stars in Hebrew. So pretty interesting stuff. Or Kokab and Kokabim. So some really fun stuff we get to see in there, some ancient Hebrew. And verse 14, and it was in the nighttime when the Lord spake these words unto me, I will multiply thee and thy seed after thee, like unto thee, if thou canst count the number of sands, so shall be the number of thy seeds. So this is getting into the Abrahamic covenant in a way, the covenant that the Lord made. And 15, and the Lord said unto me, Abraham, I show these things unto thee before ye go into Egypt, that ye may declare all these words. So he's being shown the grand visions of the cosmos so that he can teach them to the Egyptians. Now, I think actually later, I'm jumping ahead of myself here. I'll get into that in a minute about the Pharaoh in Egypt. If two things exist, and there be one above the other, there shall be greater things above them. Therefore, Kolob is the greatest of all the Kokabim that thou hast seen, because it is nearest unto me. Now these, of course, Kolob in a way could represent the Savior as the greatest among them. The Kokabim are the great and noble ones, all the prophets and great people, apostles and other great people, men and women, I believe, are in there as well, and how they come together. So some of these are symbolic and representative, but we can, in a way, understand these in astronomical terms as well. Verse 17, now if there be two things above, one above the other, and the moon be above the earth, then it may be that a planet or star may exist above it. There is nothing that the Lord thy God shall take in his heart to do, but what he will do it. So he doesn't think about stuff unless he's going to do it. He's honest. He has that integrity of, I'm not going to think it or entertain those ideas unless I'm willing to do them. So he's very honest with himself, which is great. It's not a bad way to live, really. But realize, again, there's a hierarchy to things, okay? And that's totally okay to have a hierarchy to things. Even in the laws of physics, we have a hierarchy. This is an important thing. I think most people don't realize this, that when we think of the laws of physics, we have the law of gravity, we have the law of electromagnetism. So electricity and magnetism are two different manifestations, basically, of the same law of physics. So that's why it's electromagnetism. We have nuclear force, and there's a strong force and a weak force in there as well. So all of these have their effects. Gravity, we know, affects everything around us. It's why we don't fly away. It's why we only jump so high. It's why it's expensive to launch a rocket or fly on a plane, because we have to break gravity. But the thing is we can break gravity. It's actually, gravity is one of the weakest of the laws of physics, forces. Okay, if you look at two magnets and you hold them together and just get them close and let go the lower one will rise up, which is defying gravity, and connect to the higher one and stay connected. Gravity, while gravity's pulling, that electromagnetic force is not going to let them fall. Now, if these were electromagnets and you could turn it off, as soon as that electromagnetic force goes, the second one drops, because gravity then takes over. But so long as that electromagnetic force is there, gravity is not strong enough to hold it, okay? And again, the nuclear forces that hold the atoms together, and then the weak nuclear force that holds atoms together, and then the strong nuclear force that holds the quarks together to keep the positive and neutral particles, protons and neutrons, in the center of the atom together. So there's all these things, but you have to realize that this is so fascinating, because these laws of physics don't overlap each other. Okay, the nuclear forces don't go outside necessarily the atom itself. They kind of stay in the atom. Okay, the electromagnetic force only works to a certain point. Once you get to a certain point, it breaks down. It can't get bigger. Okay, we see like lightning, but it doesn't last very long, and it doesn't stick around all the time. And then gravity takes over after that. And then gravity only gets to a certain point. And this is actually really fascinating scientific history, especially women in science. Back in the 1950s, one of the first women, and I can see the image of her face, but I don't remember her name. She was one of the first women to get an actual doctorate degree in astrophysics. And at that time, everybody was studying the center of galaxies because of this idea of the black holes. Stephen Hawking really revolutionized this idea. And so because she was a woman, and the kinds of laws and perception and ideas of women back in the 1950s, no one would let her study the center of the galaxies, where everybody else, all the men were studying. And so she decided she's going to pick up this old theory. There's a guy in the 1930s and a scientist that he came up with a theoretical idea that the gravity only goes so far and then dissipates and it doesn't work anymore. And so the outside of a galaxy rotates at a different speed than everything else. Well, she just picked up his old theory and decided, I'm going to work on it and either prove it or disprove it. So she went to work on his theory, and she proved him right. A galaxy extends out, the rate at which planets and solar systems are rotating around that black hole in the galaxy is really high right after the edge, after that, just outside that event horizon. It gets high and then it kind of levels out. And the effect of that gravitational pull is the same for about the 2/3 of the galaxy extending out. And then that last third of the galaxy is moving at a lot slower pace. So the farther you are from the center, the less gravitational effects you feel. And she realized that gravity operates on a square basis. I think I said that right. If you're the scientist, you can correct me in the comments. That'd be fine. But basically what that means is if gravity is x at a close distance, when you double that distance, so if it's here, it's x, we double that difference, you think x divided by 2, so x cut in half. So you got half the amount of gravity here. You don't. You have a fourth the gravity. So it doesn't go in half, it comes down by a fourth. So gravity really drops off on a slope, not a line. It drops really quickly. So gravity, she proved, this guy's theory, that gravity does not govern galaxies. Something else controls the rate of galaxies, and now we know that's dark matter, which is kind of a different type of gravity, basically. But anyways, there's a hierarchy. Gravity only goes so far, and then dark matter and dark energy and other things take over in more galactic, astronomy type terms. So, but it only goes in so far, and then electromagnetism and the nuclear forces take over. Gravity doesn't exist. Gravity does not exist at the atomic level. It has no influence. Pretty fascinating. That's nuclear forces and electromagnetism. So each law has a limit to what it does, and there's other laws that go outside of that. That's kind of what they're talking about in here. So there are lesser laws, there are laws for this world, and then there are higher laws of heaven as well, okay? Celestial, terrestrial, telestial, there's different laws, okay? Hopefully that's help you understand this concept. Verse 18, howbeit that he made the greater star, as also if there be two spirits, one shall be more intelligent than the other. Yet these two spirits, notwithstanding one is more intelligent than the other, have no beginning. They existed before, they shall have no end, they shall exist after, for they are nolum, or eternal. In 18, the footnote for 18b is nolum is a transliteration of a Hebrew word meaning eternal, basically. So some really interesting things that we get to learn there. The intelligence isn't the same among everybody. Some are more intelligent than others, and that's okay. It's not a reason to hate or segregate from, but just an understanding of it, basically. But even though there's different levels of intelligence among people, we are all still eternal, meaning we existed before and we will continue to exist after. There's a continuation for our life. Death is not the end, basically. Verse 19, and the Lord said unto me, these two facts do exist, that there are two spirits, one being more intelligent than the other. There shall be another more intelligent than they. I am the Lord thy God. I am more intelligent than they all. So again, there's a hierarchy to things. So God is more intelligent than us. In a way, you could say the prophets are the ones that are more intelligent than the average person. So we listen to the prophet, who then listens to God, and it all goes back to him. Verse 20, the Lord thy God sent his angel to deliver thee from the hands of the priests of Elkanah. And that's facsimile number 1, where he's being sacrificed. And Hugh has a bunch more to talk about with that. Be prepared to take some notes on those facsimiles. We've got a lot to go over there. Verse 21, I dwell in the midst of them all. I now therefore have come down unto thee to declare unto thee the words which my hands have made, wherein my wisdom excelleth them all. For I rule in the heavens above and in the earth beneath, in all wisdom and prudence, over all the intelligences thine eyes have seen from the beginning. I came down in the beginning, in the midst of all the intelligences thou hast seen. Very important. So he's again talking about the hierarchy and these great intelligences that Abraham has seen of these people. Okay, so he's seeing the council, basically. You could talk about prophets and apostles and very highly spiritual people. Verse 22, now the Lord has shown unto me, Abraham, the intelligences that were organized before the world was, and among all these were many of the noble and great ones. So again, this is getting into that the grand council of heaven and other things like that as well. I have a note here, Hugh Nibley again. He says here, this is talking about the creation play. So this is an important concept in apocryphal and ancient writings. The creation drama, which is reflected in the great year rites all over the ancient world, does not take place in a vacuum, but in the presence of God, seated in the midst of his holy ones, with whom he takes counsel, they being his mind and mouth on the occasion as he is theirs. Though the plan from first to last is entirely God's own, he discusses it with others, consulting with the souls of the righteous before deciding to create the world. Not because he needs their advice, but because the plan concerns them and requires their maximum participation in it. If you've ever read that book, Counseling with Your Counselors, you'll start to understand this concept and idea of how councils in the church run because of these kinds of things. The discussion was a lively one. Apart from those rebellious angels who rejected it entirely, there was a general protest that the plan would be too painful for some parties and too risky for all. It was the generous voluntary offering of the Son of God that settled the question. Those who embrace the plan wholeheartedly on this earth are the elect, the people of the plan, chosen from the foundation of the world. They form on earth a community dedicated to the faithful working out of God's plan, in close cooperation with the heavenly hosts. They alone have access to the heavenly hidden treasure because they alone covet and seek it. So just some fun things we get to learn. This creation myth is some of the most oldest writings in the world. That there's this play, this creation song, the creation myth that came together, understanding these things, basically. Trying to understand the things of God, and these grand visions that the prophets have, and they write them down, give us an opportunity to study and learn, which is why we have the temple and everything else. Okay, some great stuff. So from there, we get into verse 23. And God saw these souls that they were good, and he stood in the midst of them, and he said, these I will make my rulers. For he stood among those that were spirits, and he saw that they were good. And he said unto me, Abraham, thou art one of them. Thou wast chosen before thou wast born. So these could be prophets, apostles, could be leaders of families, or other types of things. So I would still say men and women are in here as well. Verse 23, we have a quote here as well. This is, again, eloquent witness. It is strange that the doctrine of premortal existence should be so hard for the world to accept. The Sefer Yetzirah, the oldest Hebrew book, usually attributed by the rabbis to Abraham, ends with a resounding declaration of his greatness in the premortal existence. If it is possible for us to be here now, it is just as possible for us to have been there then. Neither proposition, as Roger Penrose has shown, can be proved by algorithm or allegory, yet we have to accept their reality. They are here. The idea of a premortal existence and a postmortal existence, this stuff has been around since humans have been around. This is not some new concoction or idea that some people would want you to believe. This is more ancient than even religion itself in a way. You can point to this stuff as older than the founding of most religions. Verse 24, and there stood one among them that was like unto God, and he said unto those who were with him, we will go down, for there is space there, and we will take of these materials, and we will make an earth whereon these may dwell. So one like unto God, the Savior, most likely is what they're talking about. And verse 25, now verse 25 is an extremely profound scripture. extremely profound, one I absolutely recommend that you memorize. Okay, this is very, very important, because verse 25 is the whole reason that everything in this life happens. The whole purpose behind our life from our perspective. Okay, we hear Moses 139. What is the purpose of this world? Moses 139 is the most oft-quoted, but that is the purpose of our life from God's perspective. Abraham 3:25 is the purpose of our life from our perspective. Very important. So it says here, and we will prove them herewith to see if they will do all things whatsoever the Lord their God shall command them. That is the essence of this life. Why did you get cut off in traffic? Why did you get shortchanged? Why did that person steal from you? Why did you lose that stuff? Why did you get sick? Why did you get a better job? Why did you lose your job? Why did your marriage work? Why did it not work? Everything is there to test us to see if we're going to keep the commandments of God. All of it is a test, okay? Very important point to always think about. So no matter what happens, why that person was rude to you at church, it's to see, are you going to stick around and go to church, or are you going to leave because of somebody else? You should always go because of you, not because of someone else. So here is something that Hugh Nibley said. He said, it is strange that the, oh, sorry, that was the same one. Just let me move past that one. Sorry. Here we have, this is actually Brigham Young, sorry. Journal of Discourses, Volume 2, page 9. The Lord has put his children here and given them bodies that are also subject to decay, to see if they will prove themselves worthy of the particles of which their tabernacles are composed, and of a glorious resurrection when their mortal bodies will become immortalized. Now, if you possess the light of the Holy Spirit, you can see clearly that trials in the flesh are actually necessary. Here's another one, and this one is Brigham Young again, Journal of Discourses, Volume 1, page 312. Salvation is an individual operation. I am the only person that can possibly save myself. When salvation is sent to me, I can reject or receive it. In receiving it, I yield implicit obedience and submission to its great author throughout my life, and to those whom he shall appoint to instruct me. In rejecting it, I follow the dictates of my own will in preference to the will of my Creator. There are those among this people who are influenced, controlled, and biased in their thoughts, actions, and feelings by some other individual or family, on whom they place their dependence for spiritual and temporal instruction, and for salvation in the end. These persons do not depend upon themselves for salvation, but upon another of their poor, weak fellow mortals. I do not depend upon any inherent goodness of my own, they say, to introduce me into the kingdom of glory, but I depend upon you, Brother Joseph, upon you, Brother Brigham, upon you, Brother Heber, or upon you, Brother James. I believe your judgment is superior to mine, and consequently I let you judge for me. Your spirit is better than mine, therefore you can do good for me. I will submit myself wholly to you and place in you all my confidence for life and salvation. Where you go, I will go, and where you tarry, there I will stay, expecting that you will introduce me through the gates into the heavenly Jerusalem. So what Brigham's saying there is, it's up to us. We can only go so far relying on the faith and testimony of others. We still have to learn it and be willing to walk that path on our own. So gain your own testimony, basically, is what he's talking about. Understand it yourself. Now, verse 26, let's get into this one here. It says, and they who keep their first estate shall be added upon, and they who keep not their first estate shall have glory in the same kingdom with those who keep their first estate. And they who keep their second estate shall have glory added upon their heads forever and ever. So what is this estate? What are they talking about in here, basically? So this is an important thing to realize. The first estate is we chose to follow the plan of God in the pre-existence. We were not the 1/3 who chose not to follow it, that were cast out. We were the 2/3 that chose to follow it. So that is keeping our first estate. Now, an estate is a organization of property or assets that you own or control. So we have properties and assets, priesthoods, powers, whatever, in heaven waiting for us when we return. Okay, that's important. So those who keep their first estate shall be added upon, which means they get to come down here and have a chance at a second estate. Very important. And they who keep not their first estate shall not have glory in the same kingdom with those who keep their first estate. So again, they get kicked out. And they who keep their second estate shall have glory added upon their heads forever and ever. So those who come down here, who are righteous, who do everything, go to the celestial kingdom, basically, they keep the second estate, they follow the commandments, they perform the ordinances, they will be added to forever and ever. That's what he's saying, basically. Now, a quote from Hugh Nibley: if you could see your real image, which came into being before you, says the Logian of Jesus, then you would be willing to endure anything. So this is an ancient writing. The Logian of Jesus says if you could understand who you were in the pre-existence, you would survive anything down here. You would take on any test, suffer any suffering to keep your second estate, basically. The author of the Thanksgiving hymn, which is a hymn in the Dead Sea Scrolls, is simply drunk with the idea of his own pre-existent glory. Such glory, according to the Johann, nine writings belongs not only to the Lord, but to all who follow him. So here's another one, in fact, about Egypt from Hugh Nibley's book, Eloquent Witness. One of the oldest Egyptian creation dramas, portrayed on the Shabako Stone, which is one of the oldest written records in the world, says that when the earth was adorned and ready to receive its inhabitants, a law was given by which every action of every creature would be judged. Quote, to him who does what is agreeable or lovable shall be given a life of eternal rest or happiness, while to him who does what is hateful or detestable shall be given death and condemnation. That's a quote from the Shabako Stone. Note that it is not necessary to categorize what is good and bad. Everyone knows it. It is the golden rule. There is no need for centuries of probabilistic head-splitting to define and assign precise numerical values to degrees of good and evil. Good and evil is simple. It's your conscience. That's that light of Christ. If you go back in the Doctrine and Covenants, the light of Christ that is given to all of us. It's a little nugget of truth that we are given like a compass or a guide, like a liahona, to guide us to more truth. That's what he's talking about here. We are all given that ability to discern light from dark, good from evil. We will now just be judged by that light, by that discernment, basically. So here's another interesting one from Hugh Nibley. He says, but why leave one's heavenly home for a dismal earthly one? To that question, constantly reiterated in the Mandean writings, the Gnostic answer was that we were forced to make the move as a punishment. Okay, so getting into the Gnostic writings, these are the writings of the people who claim to know the teachings of Jesus, but were later seen as heretics and kicked out of what was building up in the 4th century to be traditional Christianity or Catholicism and those kinds of things. The Gnostics are the extra writers, the other writers that were out there at that time in the New Testament, post-New Testament time. He says, but the treasure doctrine was the very opposite. We are here as a reward, enjoying an opportunity to achieve yet greater things by being tried and tested, that each one might be promoted according to his intelligence and the perfections of his way, or be retarded according to his wrongdoings. This is the well-known doctrine of the two ways. For this reason the world has existed through the ages, says the Clementine Recognitions, so that the spirits destined to come here might fulfill their number, and here make their choice between the upper and the lower worlds, both of which are represented here. In what has been regarded as the oldest ritual document in existence, the so-called Shabako Stone from Memphis, we find the concept full-blown. To him who doeth good will be given life and salvation. To him who doeth evil will be given the death of the condemned, according to that decree, conceived in the heart and brought forth by the tongue, which shall be the measure of all things. So something to think about. That's why we are here on this earth, to be tested, to see if we're going to keep the commandments or not, in great amounts and in small amounts, okay? Verse 27, and the Lord said, whom shall I send? And one answered like unto the Son of Man, here am I, send me." That was the Savior. "And another answered and said, Here am I, send me. And the Lord said, I will send the first. And the second was angry and kept not his first estate. And at that day many followed after him." So this is talking about the war in heaven, when we needed a Savior to come, as we will learn more about this later on, of course. Just to give a quick summary, that we needed someone to administer the plan to us on earth, because we have a veil over our eyes, or a partition, a curtain, where we cannot see the previous existence and light. We only get so much of it down here because of the test, that someone has to come administer the gospel to us, but they need to be able to pay the price for everybody's sins. And the Savior said, I will do that. I will sacrifice myself and teach the people and take upon him my sins and give the glory to you, God, Father. And Satan raised his hand and says, I will do it, but I've got a different plan. I am going to put in place a plan and make the people obey it. So there is no sins to be repented of. It's 100% guaranteed plan to work for everybody. But that destroys our agency to choose, which means we won't be able to progress to make better choices and improve ourselves. And Satan wanted all of God's glory. He wanted God out of the way and he would become God, basically. And that was the plan that got kicked out. And a third of the host of heaven followed him, and 2/3 stayed with God and salvation with the Savior. And of course, Adam stood up and says, I will defend the plan as well, and do that, and all those things. So some really fun stuff we've learned. Hopefully you've learned a lot of great things today. Leave your thoughts and ideas in the comments, what you think about what we've learned in Abraham chapter 3. And if you want more, go look at the Come Follow Me verse. The first week is Abraham 3 and Moses 1 as well. So a lot of fun things to learn. And stay tuned for Abraham chapter